Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness, and Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today I have a special guest, Adam Aronovich. He is a mental health practitioner and researcher working with Amazonian traditional medicines. So please welcome Adam. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here and sharing a little bit of my work.
Yeah, we're excited to hear about that. So let's just dive in, and why don't we start by you telling us a little about your story and what led you to doing the work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think first of all, I just want to say English is not my first language. So
okay, no worries.
I do make an effort to open my mouth a little bit more than usual so people can understand when I'm articulating things. Mm-hmm. But at any point you can ask me to just slow down or try a little bit more.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, I think I come from the field of mental health. I worked for a long time, mostly in psychiatric hospitals, working with people with psychotic diagnoses, and for a few years I did that. And I mean, very long story short, at some point I realized that I really did want to continue help people, but I wasn't super fond with the institutional approach, how we treat. The whole approach to mental health in the West seemed to me not ideal, in the sense that it's based on both, the for-profit medical model that doesn't necessarily always incentivizes individual and collective benefits, but also just the limits of it. Yeah. So after a while of doing that, I decided I wanted to go back to school and research, basically finding different ways or different approaches to address human suffering that may not be present necessarily in Western institutions. And I went traveling. I traveled for a few years. I spent time in different countries, looking at more traditional cultures and how they approach health and well-being, human suffering, just questions, about how sadness is experienced in different cultures. What does anxiety mean in different parts of the world? What is madness, right? From India to Peru to Mexico, just different cultures. And not surprisingly, I did find that actually many of the things that we think are universal are actually very Western. And not all people all over the world live their health and well-being in the same ways. And that these definitions do change and perceptions do change. And then there's different ways in which people not only diagnose, but also treat these things. In the last 5 years, I've been in the Amazon rainforest working with Amazonian plant medicines. I'm sharing a lot of space with indigenous tribes there who have very different conceptions of what a person is, what well-being means, suffering, and so on. So that has informed my work a lot. And now I'm pretty much in the stage of writing my doctoral dissertation based on that research, hoping to bring a little bit of that wisdom from more traditional cultures that have different worldviews and different cosmologies and different ways of conceptualizing, diagnosing, and treating mental illnesses as things that we can learn in the West to offer better care and other options to people. So that's kind of in a nutshell, very, very compact resume of that.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. And I'm sure there are many, many points that we could dig into. I think maybe the first one that I'd be curious about is sort of, if you're doing a whole PhD on it, it's probably going to have to come at a very high level. But what are some of the differences that you see between, some of the different places you've been, or, if the bulk of your work has been focused on sort of the Amazonian cultures and whatnot? Maybe you can focus there, or it sounds like you're broadly traveled, but be curious what some of the differences you see are.
Yeah, I think one of the main differences is that in the West, most of the mental health care that we have is symptomatic. We tend to treat the symptoms as opposed to the root of the issue. This is something that we don't really know very well how to do. And also there aren't many incentives to really do that. I mean, the way that, I mean, psychiatry, for example, the way that psychiatry is set up as part of the medical industrial complex has an incentive to help people to some extent, but still keep them as long-term clients. So there's like more of an incentive to treat symptoms rather than root causes of many of the diseases. And in many ways also like pathologize more and more aspects of the human experience, which may not necessarily need to be pathologized. Yeah, so I mean, with every new edition, we have the DSM in the West, which is kind of the diagnostic manual, which is pretty much like the Bible of like different diagnoses that a person can get. Like with each edition, it expands. So pretty much anybody can find themselves in one or two or three categories depending on their needs. So a big part of what we're doing is that we're increasingly pathologizing more and more aspects of what it means to be human. And many of these things are not necessarily pleasant, but doesn't mean that they're pathological either. They just mean that that's the part of the wider range of the human experience. Like grief, for example, right? Like a person experiences like a heavy loss, like a close family member or somebody that they love that passes away, and there's a natural process of grief. Right. But increasingly that grief gets pathologized. So now, like you can get prescribed antidepressants for it and other tools that may not be the best approach to allow that person to actually process the grief and complete in the healthiest way possible that grief. I mean, there's other aspects of it, like the pathologization of childhood that we're experiencing all over the West with increasingly more common diagnosis of ADHD and the proliferation of medication for children who seem to be healthy, other than the fact that they're not really inclined towards a particular model of education. Yeah. Just to give you an example from fieldwork, I mean, if you go to the Amazon, it took me quite a long time to explain to my Amazonian teachers when I talked about anxiety or when I talked about depression. For me, it was kind of like self-evident. It's like, well, everybody knows what depression is, right? Everybody knows what anxiety is. But it took me quite a while to actually understand that we didn't share the same language, because they didn't really know what depression was, because in their understanding, I had to translate things, in terms that were more graspable. Like, oh no, depression is when a person is like really, really sad, but not like just sad, like really sad, also like apathic, and like when a person, like I need to come up with metaphors to explain depression, and they're like, oh yeah, we get it, it's just sadness, like a person is really sad. Like, well, I mean, how do you treat depression, how do you treat sadness are two very different things. Yeah, in the West, we think of depression mostly as a brain disease. We say, oh, well, a person is depressed because there's an imbalance of neurotransmitters in the brain, and the best way to treat that is we need to give them a drug that will increase the level of those neurotransmitters so the person will stop feeling sad. That's one way to go about it. In the Amazon, they don't really resort to medication as much because, one, they don't really have access to all of those things as we do, but also because in their worldview, when a person is very, very sad, the first thing that they do is that the community embraces them, right? Like they have a much less individualistic outlook on things. They're like, if a person is very sad, they don't immediately default to say, oh, like that person is sad because something is wrong with them, or something is wrong with their brains, or something has happened. They're like, oh, that person is sad maybe because their families are away, or they're not being like held enough by their community, or what we need to do is just include them more in our activities and make sure that they're eating. So, like some of the women of the community will make sure to make food for them every day. People will go and talk to them, entertain them. It's a much more communal, active participation in that person's health, because the basic understanding in these sort of communities is that health and well-being are not necessarily an individual responsibility. They're a collective responsibility. Yeah. And everybody in that community is responsible for the well-being of each other. So there's much less of an incentive to individualize and pathologize these experiences, but rather there's much more incentive to mobilize the community to help that person. Yeah. Anxiety is very similar. Anxiety took me a long time to explain anxiety. Like by the end of it, we came to an understanding that anxiety is just exaggerated worry. Like the way that I would explain anxiety, like that person just worries too much, and he's worrying too much about things that perhaps he shouldn't be worrying about because it's useless to worry about those things. Right. It's just like fantasy scenarios that are neurotic, right? But we don't really have control over it. So for them, like, how do you help a person who is experiencing too much worries? You know.
Right.
So I think the thing in the West also, like, because we tend to individualize diseases so much, we often also tend to ignore the context. Like oh, like that person is just experiencing anxiety, so we need to medicate them. But you know, like people don't get anxious just because they get anxious. A lot of us get anxious because of the structures that we live in. You know, we get anxious because perhaps we're working 3 different jobs and we are not really able to pay off our student debt, or we cannot really pay rent, or you know, we're anxious because we're kind of like holding with our nails and teeth to a job that we don't really like, because without it we cannot really pay our bills. So there's many kind of like structural, contextual pressure points that exacerbate anxiety and exacerbate depression that are not necessarily only individual responsibility, but they're embedded within social structures, and they're embedded within cultural systems, and they're embedded within socioeconomic systems, right? And these are the things that we don't often look at. You know, like, oh, like maybe our socioeconomic model actually does have an impact on how people perceive themselves and worry about things. And, you know, like we are depressed for all sorts of different reasons. You know, like in our generation, we also have to take into account existential and environmental factors. You know, because one of the main things that Indigenous people are very clear about, again, it's not only about the interdependent nature of the human community, but also they're very well embedded within their environment, right? They don't think necessarily just as individuals, but they think as individuals they are inhabiting a particular stretch of land. So all of the creatures that inhabit that land, whether it's the trees and the animals and the birds, they have a very strong awareness of that interdependent nature, right? Like when you think about hunting, right? Like we know Indigenous people hunt, obviously. In the Amazon, hunting is kind of like the main source of protein. But hunting is not something that people just do for, you know, you don't wake up in the morning and you just go hunting. There's ritual involved in hunting. There's a lot of taboo involved in hunting, right?
Can I just like summarize, like I want to fully like grasp what it is that you're saying and like make sure that I'm following with you. Kind of what I'm hearing is that like in these indigenous Amazonian cultures is that they utilize their community, whereas in Western cultures where like individuals, I got to figure it out on my own. I got to like suffer in silence, I think is a common thing that we do, or it's like it's weakness if you reach out to people or go to a therapist or things like that. But it sounds like it's not so stigmatized in like asking for help or support, or it's just kind of like what you do. There's not really much resistance towards like having your community support you when you're going through moments of sadness or extreme worry. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely a big part of it. Yeah, like the stigma is definitely a big one. But again, like, you know, like there's many aspects of being human, again, that get kind of like lost in the noise, you know, within like this hyper individualistic ethos of the Western world, right? Where almost every human relationship at some point gets commodified to some extent, right? And many of the things that are usually or have been historically being done in community are now compartmentalized, and now they're experts that do that, and external people that you pay to go to, okay, so they can provide a service. But in traditional cultures, that's still part of what the extended family or the community does, right? Like you sit around the campfire and you have a heart-to-heart with somebody, and that's a therapeutic relationship, right? Like they don't necessarily think of like, oh, I need to go to some expert or some therapist or some doctor and tell them my problems or my worries, because I have like my extended community who can do that. And that's something that we have progressively lost for different reasons.
What are, when you rely on your community for your mental support and your health and well-being, like, are they just there to listen to your concerns and issues, or are they giving like advice or wisdom? Like what's happening that helps that individual that's kind of in that suffering state feel better, I guess? I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main medicine is not necessarily what they say or what kind of advice they offer, but just the connection in itself, right?
Yeah.
Like the empathy, just like the humanity of it.
Yeah.
Like that's the main thing.
Right. Mm-hmm. I could see how that is healing in itself. I think just having human interaction and connection is so important. And I think, and even though in Western culture, we have all this technology and these devices to connect us, I feel like we've progressively become less connected on a human to human level with more like authenticity and depth. And that seems to be like a missing in our culture, I think, a lot of the times. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is exactly the main piece, I think, that I'm trying to bring to the conversation again, like, because we become hyper professionalized, but oftentimes that comes at the cost of the actual intimacy between humans. Like that human connection that brings forth, the empathy, the actual, like, hey, I see you and I care for you and you matter to me, beyond this paywall, I mean, beyond the service I'm providing for you, that you're paying for me, there's something deeper. There's like there's an inherent human connection of care. That is politics of really caring for each other.
Yeah. So it's okay if you don't have an answer to this, but I would be curious, we've kind of talked over the problem, right? Which is, or at least an opportunity, whereas there could be a lot more community involvement kind of in the Western medicine to get people more support and maybe rely less heavily on medicine and some of these things to try to blunt some of the experiences. I'd be curious what you think are some of the steps or opportunities for opening up some more of this in Westernized societies, because culturally, like we've been talking about, I don't think it's a super strong piece of the culture. So I'd just be curious what you think were some of the opportunities to move things or what we can work on. And if you don't have answers to that, that's fine. That's kind of a ambush question.
No, it's okay. I mean, so you said it's not a particularly strong part of our culture. You mean like the connection?
Yeah, just in the R being the United States, right? But also like a lot of Westernized countries.
Yeah.
It's just a weaker piece of the culture. Like, so for example, if someone's depressed, you may have one or two very close people, and this is a very generic example, but you may have one or two very close people who try to help a little bit. But then it's not going to be long before they go, okay, you should go out to, like you were talking about, some sort of specialist. You should pay for the help you need. So I'm curious if you see opportunities or like ways or like a program we could build or like something, like what could we do to kind of either as individuals, like be more available for other people, or as a community start trying to like build up these connections?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's $1 million question. I don't have like very specific answers, but I do have some ideas. I think we have gotten to this point for a particular reason, which is like following through almost to the last conclusions of a very hyper individualistic ethos that has been kind of like one of the ideological bases of the West for many years, right? And the glorification of the individual has also resulted, as you say, in the erosion of our social bonds and the erosions of communities, the reduction of tribes and extended families to nuclear families, which are more often than not broken nuclear families. So people really, for the most part, don't have many people in their lives to rely on, as you mentioned. People are lucky, for the most part, to have one good friend or two people that they can actually like have intimate conversations with. And that's a very pathological social situation. Humans are social mammals. Our brains are wired towards community. Like our social brains require like that kinship, require that connection, require that social interaction, like the intimacy and empathy of like a larger group of people than what is provided for us nowadays. In the Western world, we're going through real epidemics of loneliness. When social scientists try to point out what are the main risks to public health from a mental health perspective, the first thing that often comes up is loneliness. Loneliness is a better predictor of almost every disease, mental and physical, than things like obesity, for example. So some governments are already starting to take action in an institutional level about like really considering loneliness as an epidemic that requires intervention. In England, I think like a couple of years ago, the Prime Minister, I think it was Theresa May, so it was maybe 3 years ago, she named a member of her cabinet to be the Minister for Loneliness of the UK. I think that was like the first instance that I heard of an actual member of parliament, like being a Minister for Loneliness. Many European countries very quickly followed through because it was something that was very relevant, not only in the UK, but all over the West. So I think, there are like public health interventions and like other government approaches that are doing that, but that obviously is just one aspect of it, because the real thing is always the grassroots aspect of it. What are people doing in order to like rebuild and recreate communities? And there are different movements. I mean, there are different intentional communities popping up in different parts. And even like I think like younger generations are like figuring out, like even in urban environments, kind of like different ways in which they can co-create like more community-based lifestyles where you can actually like rely on each other. And you can see this like a lot in places. I mean, just from my experience, like in the West Coast, in the US, like if you go to place like San Francisco or Oakland, like there's like different groups of people who like, you know what, we're gonna go and like organize like a neighborhood association where we can like create events and hang out and kind of like recreating that old lifestyle of kind of like European street parties and communities where you actually get to know your neighbor and you're not just like moving into a building where you're co-living with strangers that you never need to know except if you're in the elevator or somebody for some reason like knocks on your door because you're making too much noise, but actually intentionally like getting to get to know the people that you sharing life with. And that's something that I am seeing more and more, like with younger people in certain like urban nuclei, when people are like much more interested in like, hey, like, we were born into this hyper individualistic mindset, but actually we are craving that connection. We are craving that community. So let's find ways of actually making that happen. Festivals are a great way to find that. The allure of many festivals, why people seek them, is because even if it's just a temporary utopia of 7 days or 6 days or 5 days, that's a very good example of what can be created when a group of strangers come together with explicit intention of connecting in a deeper level with each other. My experience comes from wellness retreats. This is part of what I was doing in the Amazon. I was facilitating workshops for like a very well-known retreat center in the Amazon. And it is really uncanny to experience. I would receive a group of 24 people, complete strangers, and in a matter of a few days, just by opening up and sharing like vulnerably and authentically about their struggles and their issues and their hopes with people they never met, there's some magic that happens when that is done in a controlled, safe setting. And there's like this sense of communitas that arises, like, like my suffering doesn't have to remain private. There's other people out there who are also struggling. And, when there is also like a mutual commitment to really enact the reciprocity and that mutual responsibility of saying like, hey, I know that you're here because you're suffering. I'm here because I'm suffering too. And we're going to help each other. By the end of that retreat, whether that's 12 days or 9 days or 20 days, then people live there as a family. Like the bonds that are formed between people are really, really, really fantastic. And like people meet afterwards, people recreate that environment. It just for the most part, it's just because it gives people a taste of what it can be when you actually meet a group of like-minded individuals who have a common goal that are really committed to share that mutual responsibility for each other's well-being. So there's different environments that can give a taste for what that is, but ultimately the responsibility for creating that in permanent spaces is really ours, all of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that because I know just firsthand with some of my experiences. I did a AmeriCorps program like so long ago after I completed my bachelor's degree, and I remember there was like one event. It was kind of like around the campfire type of a feel, but we were just all strangers, just thrown into a group, and we were just given the opportunity to go up and share a little about ourselves. And maybe 10 people in, like someone just decided to just be super, super vulnerable and share some really, really incredible things, which is profound in front of a group of strangers. And that shifted the energy for everyone to start, like created the snowball effect where just within that one evening, we could feel a lot more connected. And it was just a beautiful experience. And I've had a similar experience with I don't know if you've heard of the Death Cafe. It's like an international event where people, just like a group of strangers, meet in a cafe or a school or church or wherever to just discuss the topic of death, which is obviously a naturally deep, intimate type of topic that isn't like in your everyday conversation. And I love them because it just, I know it seems like a morbid topic, but I love them because it created like instant intimacy and connection within like a span of 30 minutes to an hour. And I love that experience. And I'm like, wow, I wish there were more opportunities like that in the US or something similar. Mm-hmm.
Memento mori, remember that you too will die. That's a beautiful meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So do you have any recommendations for, people that are feeling in the US that are feeling like depressed, lonely, anxious, and they don't necessarily have community right now, or they don't even know where to begin, like seeking out community support? Would you have like any recommendations of where to start?
That's a great question. I mean, the US is particularly tricky because there's not many public places where you can actually meet people beyond kind of controlled environments or paid activities. That's part of the kind of like that's ingrained in the economic system. But I guess there's still a lot of possibilities. Like there's meetup groups, for example, where you can find like-minded people who share similar interests, and then go and meet up. There's a lot of support groups that are online, and I mean, online is not necessarily the best substitute for the actual oxytocin and intimacy of a real connection, but it's a very good place to start to find people who are like-minded and like maybe create some other connections. I don't know if you guys in this podcast I don't know what your stance is on like psychedelic medicines, but that is something that in the Amazon, that's kind of like the central component of many of the plant-based medicines that indigenous people in the Amazon work with. And that's something that I recommend always, with a caveat that it needs to be done very carefully.
Yeah.
But it is one of those opportunities in which that door of possibility for community opens up, particularly when these are done in a controlled ritual setting. That's the kind of experience that can really break down the barriers of isolation and allow people to see beyond our protections and layers of defense. You're like, oh, I see you, beyond all of those layers of protection and defense mechanisms that you built over the years to protect your soul. I see you, and I love you for it. And, that's kind of like an instant recognition. So those experiences are very powerful, but obviously they need to be done carefully. And in the US, they're not legal everywhere. So something that needs to be said.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense in that it would help. I think Americans are very guarded emotionally. So to just, be so vulnerable or share their dark secrets or thoughts is not necessarily easy, or maybe it just doesn't feel safe for them. And so it's like removing those barriers makes sense, or having some assistance, whatever that might be.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I can speak of as a man, I mean, again, like this is not necessarily only like a men issue, but I do think there's many men groups that are now becoming more and more prevalent, which are facilitated and geared particularly towards kind of like a reawakening or a reimagining of what like a next stage masculinity can be. And a lot of that does draw on the fact that as men, we're not often like socialized in a very healthy perception of what masculinity means, particularly when it comes to emotional literacy.
Yeah.
And me included, and many other people, maybe with the younger generations, a little bit different, but I do know, like with me and my group of peers and so on, like it does take an intentional effort to become more emotionally literate, which is an essential component of mental health, to like really learn to discern and give ourselves permission to express and experience things like sadness, for example. I mean, it's kind of like a cliche, right? Like men don't cry, like boys don't cry, whatever. Well, no, we do cry, and like we do need spaces in which we can re-experience that and re-socialize ourselves to actually be fully emotional beings and not just fragments of beings that don't really feel or don't really know how to express healthy emotions. So men's groups are popping up in different places. That's something that I recommend for men who are looking for community and an opportunity to really learn how to reconnect with parts of ourselves that maybe have been suppressed because our culture doesn't really allow us many spaces to actually experience that in a healthy way.
Yeah, and that really is something that I also have had to spend some time walking through, is just sort of this experience of how to deal with emotions correctly, because I think, or not correctly, but in a useful way, because I used to think kind of what you were talking about, like, oh, you should never express emotion. And really what it was rooted in is this idea of like, oh, I don't want to have these big displays, right? I don't want to I don't want to get so angry I start breaking stuff. I don't want to get so sad I just cry in the middle of public. I don't want to get so whatever other emotion that I'm having these big displays. And it came across to me as like, okay, so just bury that stuff all the way down. And I know for me, it really helped to learn that, like, okay, the emotional aspect is useful and there's a point to it and it's part of human experience and it's something that we need, really. You can experience these emotions without having these huge displays, right? There are ways to like feel sadness without just being pouting in the corner for 6 months and not talking to anyone and crying and not moving. And if you want to cry, if you feel that bad, and then that's part of it, that's totally great. But it made a big difference for me to learn that one piece. So I just kind of wanted to throw it out here, which is, it's not about like shutting off all the emotions. It's about finding ways to process and live with them and then react to them in the way that you want, whatever that may be. Anyway, going back a couple steps, you mentioned psychedelics, and I would be curious what sort of, you said you did some like work with them there. I'd be curious what sort of transformations you've seen or what sort of interactions you've seen people have with them, because I know there has been some promising research on using them to help fight some things like depression and whatnot. And then there has been a long period of it being very, very outlawed in the United States, at least. And then a more recent period of some more research and studies starting to come back into light. So I would be curious to dig a little bit more onto that aspect of your experience and background and just hear a little bit more about what you've seen.
Yeah, so I mean, my doctoral research is precisely on the therapeutic potential of a brew that is called ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is the center, or at least one of the main components of many different Amazonian medical traditions. It's a mixture of primarily two plants that has been used for at least many centuries in the Amazon rainforest, and still is a very big and important part of Amazonian cosmologies. And ayahuasca is psychoactive or psychedelic in the sense that it is a very embodied experience that is very multidimensional. And the phenomenology of the experience is something that is very unpredictable. So it can take many shapes and forms depending on where that person is at. So it can be like, like we've been talking about, like emotional awakenings. That's one of the common experiences. Like ayahuasca can very well like facilitate that emotional awakening. So it's very useful for people who are in complicated grief processes, for example. People who are repressing grief or unable to connect with grief, or for some other reason, like not really being able to complete a healthy grieving process. This is one of the research projects that I was involved with, that actually we have papers already published in kind of impact journals, the therapeutic of ayahuasca in treating grief. So I'm using this as one example. And yeah, and so ayahuasca can often facilitate for that person an emotional opening to be able to connect with that grief or to process that grief in a way that is beneficial. So, like the emotional component is one thing. There's another component which is more epistemic, which relates to how we process information or how we acquire knowledge about the world, which is something that I think is shared by many psychedelics. You kind of go oftentimes hear that cliche like, oh, psychedelics will open your mind, or psychedelics will kind of expand your awareness. I mean, those things are true in the sense that psychedelics oftentimes do provide a different perspective or a different outlook on things that allows our minds to process information a little bit differently. Yeah, so it gives us kind of like a multifocal perspective on many, on like different issues that we have. So it can be very useful in the sense of like just expanding the possibility of what the world can be like for people, right? Particularly for people who have like a narrower vision of what the world is like, people who have maybe, grew up in very restrictive households or very strict metaphysical doctrines, and then psychedelics can oftentimes kind of like break through that programming and allow people to see a wider picture of the world. So like, oh, maybe there's more to it than I thought. And that awareness of maybe there's more to it than I thought is already very healing for people, because it provides a much wider framework to work with in trying to solve problems or eliciting growth and so on and so forth. One very important aspect of ayahuasca is that ayahuasca is embedded within the cosmologies and worldviews of Amazonian people, which are very different than the ones that we have in the West. And I think this is what I started to say beforehand, and now we come full circle to it. Because in the West, we have obviously a very materialistic worldview. Yeah, our world is made of atoms, and whatever we call spirit is relegated to a second plane, if at all. Yeah, our world is made of atoms, made of objects. Everything has to be tangible, evidence-based, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, except oftentimes it misses the subtler aspects of phenomenology, which is like the human experience. Because most of us do have an intuition, that there's something beyond just matter to some extent. In Amazonian cultures, that's a given, because Amazonian cultures are not necessarily, they don't necessarily subscribe to materialistic ontologies. Their ontologies are based on spirit. In the Amazonian world, everything is spirit. So humans are spirit, but also animals are spirit, trees are spirit, plants are spirit, rocks are spirit, rain is spirit, like everything is spirit. And what that means basically is that everything in this world, human and non-human, shares the same essence. And what that means is that every quality that humans have, everything else also has, right? So humans, we think of ourselves as being intelligent, and being intentional and having agency over the world and feeling emotions and all of those things. And for Amazonian people, those are qualities that are shared by everybody. There's human people, but there's also non-human people, right? There's bird people and plant people and tree people, wild hog people. Everybody is people, and everybody's intentional, everybody's intelligent, everybody shares the same thing, right? So I was kind of giving the example of hunting. That when an Amazonian person goes hunting, they're not just bringing meat back to the community, they're literally killing people, right? So you don't just kill people, there's a very strict ritual, right? And a lot of rules that go with it. So you have to connect with spirit. And let's say you want to go hunting deer, right? So some way you have to communicate with those deer, because the assumption is that the deer are also people. So they're also communicative, they're also intentional, they're also intelligent. You can talk to them, you can communicate with them. So you go like, hey, deer, like the human community is hungry. We would like to go hunting. It's very important for us as human community to do this in a reciprocal way. We want to maintain the balance and the harmony. We want to do this right. So we want to ask you, like, how is spring treating you? Are your women fertile? Are your offspring thriving? How many deer can we take in order to feed our community, but also ensure that you keep thriving and that your community keeps stable, right? So ayahuasca oftentimes will function as that bridge between the human world and the non-human world. In the Amazonian cosmologies, the ayahuasca space is that space that allows let's say the shamans, for lack of a better word for this situation, the Amazonian shamans, the opportunity to connect with the spirit world and receive information from the deer, from the trees, from the plants, and then share that back with the human community. So there's medical uses, there's community-based uses, there's divination uses, there's communication uses, there's all sorts of different uses. The one that really stands out for me, the one that I focus on my research, is the relational aspect of it, which is the thing that we've been speaking about this whole time, which is people come to that retreat for the most part feeling like really alienated and lonely and isolated, with depression and anxiety and trauma and alone in the world. And more often than not, through the collective ayahuasca experience, through the group dynamics, through the facilitation of group activities, through the work of the indigenous healers, there is something that shifts, again, in that understanding that they're actually not alone, that there is a network of interconnected relationships of which we are all part of. And this is difficult to explain without like resorting to kind of like new agey hippie cliches of we're all one and we're all, but there is something about that experience that oftentimes brings up a knowing. It's not even like a thought or a feeling, but a deep knowing that we're not alone.
Yeah.
That we are part of something much bigger, of interconnected network of beings, which includes us and includes other people, but also includes non-human people, the environment, the trees, the rivers, everything is an interconnected network. And that we are responsible for ourselves just as much as we're responsible for everything else. Yeah. And I think this is the main insight. This is the moment where things shift and say, if I really want to be healthy, if I want to transcend my depression, if I want to be a healthy person, it's not only about me, it's about everybody else. It's about me feeling better as an individual, but me doing my part to help change structures that are violent towards me and towards other people, or doing my part towards averting ecological catastrophe. Yeah. People think, when you think about anxiety, like anxiety is not only individual, it also extends out into the world. It's very difficult not to feel anxious in the times that we live in, where we're seeing the devastation of our life support systems, when we're seeing the ravaging effects that global warming is having all over the world. when we don't really know what this world is going to look like in a decade or two, or whether the world that we're living our children is even going to be livable. I mean, that's a huge source of anxiety. We cannot gaslight people all the time. It's like, you're just, your brain is imbalanced. I mean, that's pretty, I mean,
Well,
people are aware.
yeah, Adam, wow, you have provided such insight into the Amazonian world, and I could see how it could be so healing, this interconnected relationship. We are out of time, so was there anything you'd like to plug before we wrap up today?
So I mean, I have a new project that is called Healing from Healing. It's you can find our group on Facebook, on Instagram, and all sorts of different social media platforms, which is an attempt to bring down the insights and the research from the work that I've been doing. I mean, the main thing is my main intention was never to just produce something for academia that doesn't really have the reach of actually impacting life. So I'm trying to kind of distill the insights and some of the results of that into a wider platform that can be available to people. And I mean, we just started that 4 weeks ago, and it's already like growing really, really quickly. So yeah, Healing from Healing. I invite you all to check it out.
Yeah, definitely check it out. We'll put links in the description. Thank you so much, Adam, for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.